All right, so welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
We've gotten a ton of requests recently about the topic of cannabis
Right.
and its effects on the human body.
And the brain.
Yeah. Um, it seems like you all are really looking for a balanced perspective on this whole thing.
Hmm.
Not just the hype, not just the fear-mongering, but like, what's the real deal here?
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into all of that today.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at some of the latest research out there. And we're even going to be using a really interesting breakdown of the topic from Kritzgesagt.
Oh, yeah. Those guys are great.
I know their videos are fantastic.
Yeah.
So with legalization happening all over the place these days, even Germany is jumping on board now.
Really?
It feels like everyone's either overly cautious or overly enthusiastic about cannabis. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I totally get that.
So we're going to unpack all of this,
Right.
hopefully give you a really well-rounded perspective on the science
Okay.
and what we actually know about the effects of cannabis.
Hmm. What I find so interesting is that we're kind of at this turning point,
Yeah.
where that old demon drug narrative is starting to fade.
Mm-hmm.
But are we swinging too far in the other direction?
That's a great question.
Are we getting overly optimistic about it?
Yeah. Are we kind of oversimplifying things
Right.
and maybe ignoring some of the potential risks?
Exactly.
And that's what we're here to find out.
Right.
I mean, criminalization was definitely not the right approach.
No, I don't think anyone's really arguing that anymore.
Right, but that doesn't automatically mean that cannabis is completely harmless.
Exactly.
There's a lot of nuance here.
Right.
And the research is starting to show some really surprising things,
Mhm.
especially about just how addictive it can be
Oh, wow.
and some of the potential long-term impacts.
Okay.
So we got to be careful with this stuff.
So one of the things that I think is really important to understand
Yeah.
is this whole potency problem.
Okay.
The THC levels in cannabis today are way higher than they were a few decades ago.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking products with 60% THC
Well,
or even higher.
wow.
That's a huge jump from like the 10% or 15% that was common back in the day.
Oh, wow.
So this increased potency
Yeah.
is a major factor driving a lot of the negative effects that we're seeing.
Okay, so for someone listening who might not be super familiar with all this jargon,
Right.
like what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Why is THC such a big deal?
So THC is the psychoactive compound in cannabis.
Okay.
It's what gets you high,
Right.
but it also has a really powerful effect on your brain chemistry.
I see.
And the higher the THC level,
Mm-hmm.
the more intense the effects are,
Yeah.
both the good and the bad.
Okay.
And this brings us to a really important point
Yeah.
that often gets overlooked,
I think.
addiction.
Oh, okay.
You might be surprised to learn
Yeah.
that recent research is actually showing that cannabis is more addictive
Wow.
than a lot of people think. Yet 2 out of 10 users actually develop a cannabis use disorder or CUD.
Okay, CUD.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So CUD,
Yeah.
it isn't just about wanting to get high all the time.
Okay.
It can involve some pretty real withdrawal symptoms.
Oh, yeah.
Think headaches, chills,
Mm-hmm.
even nausea and sleep problems.
Wow.
It's about being unable to stop using,
Right.
even when it's impacting your work, your relationships, or your health.
So if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, wait a minute, is that me?
Right.
Am I struggling with this?
Huh.
What are some of the red flags to watch out for?
That's a good question. Some of the key risk factors are the amount of THC you're using,
Okay.
hence the potency problem we were talking about.
Right.
How often you're using,
Okay.
and the age at which you started.
Got it.
So if you're finding it hard to cut back,
Yeah.
or if you're using cannabis despite knowing that it's having some negative consequences,
Mm-hmm.
those could be some warning signs.
Okay, so we've talked about addiction,
Right.
but it's not just about the physical dependence either, right?
No, definitely not.
What about the mental and emotional impacts of heavy cannabis use?
Yeah, so heavy users often report experiencing things like
Go.
bad moods,
Okay.
irritability,
Mhm.
paranoia, anxiety, and even depression.
Oh, wow.
And what's really interesting
Yeah.
and kind of a cruel twist
Yeah.
is that a lot of heavy users actually feel like they need cannabis
Right.
to cope with these feelings.
Yeah, like they needed to feel better.
Yeah, when in reality, it's actually making them worse.
Oh, so it's like this vicious cycle.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
The drug that you're using to try and feel better is actually making you feel worse.
Exactly. And there's also a strong link between loneliness and cannabis use.
Ooh, wow.
can lead to social withdrawal,
Right.
which then makes you feel even more lonely.
Makes sense.
So it's kind of downward spiral.
I've also heard about people experiencing kind of a mental numbness. Yeah.
From heavy cannabis use. Is
Yeah.
that something you've come across in the research?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So heavy users,
Yeah.
they can develop a tolerance
Got
to
it.
the pleasurable effects of cannabis,
Mm,
so they don't feel as much joy or excitement from everyday activities anymore.
I see.
It's like their brain's reward system gets stuck in this state of low-level satisfaction.
Oh, wow.
And what's really concerning is that this can actually suppress boredom signals,
Great.
making it even harder to break free from that cycle.
So it's like they're constantly numbing themselves out
Exactly.
instead of facing their challenges or pursuing things that actually bring them joy.
Right, right. And that can
Totally.
really stunt personal growth.
Makes sense.
It's really important to be aware of this potential downside,
Yeah.
especially for younger users
Mm-hmm.
whose brains are still developing.
Right. Still forming.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like we're trading one addiction for another in a way.
Like, we're moving away from alcohol dependence in some cases,
Mm-hmm.
but are we just replacing it with cannabis dependence?
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And that kind of brings us to the physical side of things.
Right.
What about those withdrawal symptoms you mentioned?
Yeah.
How bad can they really get?
So for heavy and daily users,
Yeah.
the withdrawal symptoms can be pretty intense.
Okay.
We're talking headaches,
Mm-hmm.
chills,
Okay.
body aches,
Wow.
nausea, difficulty sleeping,
Really?
even fever in some cases.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And it's not just a quick thing either.
Okay.
It can last for several weeks,
Really
depending on how much you were using
Right.
for how long.
So this isn't just a mental and emotional struggle, it's
No.
a physical one too.
Exactly.
And now I think we should address kind of the biggest unknown here,
Yeah.
which is those long-term effects on the brain.
Right.
You mentioned that THC affects brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So what does the research say about the lasting impact of that?
This is where things get a little bit complicated.
Okay.
There's a lot of ongoing research, but we don't have all the answers yet.
Okay.
We do know that THC
Yeah.
directly impacts brain chemistry,
Okay.
and there's some evidence to suggest that it can even lead to structural changes in the brain.
Structural changes in the brain.
Yeah, particularly in areas related to memory and executive function.
So can you give us a little more detail on that?
Sure.
Like what kind of changes are we talking about here?
So, for example, some studies have shown
Yeah.
that heavy cannabis use can be associated with
Okay.
reduced gray matter volume
Oh, wow.
in certain areas of the brain,
Okay.
particularly the hippocampus,
Right.
which plays a key role in memory formation.
Right. Yeah.
Now, whether these changes are reversible is still being debated.
Okay.
More research is definitely needed there. But what we do know is that heavy cannabis use,
Yeah.
especially in the long term,
Yeah.
can affect those crucial cognitive functions that we rely on every day.
Right. So for someone listening who's concerned about these impacts,
Yeah.
what specific cognitive functions should they be aware of?
So we're talking about things like memory,
Okay.
learning, reasoning, attention span,
Right.
impulse control.
Yeah.
Imagine if you're constantly impairing these essential brain functions. It's going to have a ripple effect on your work, your relationships, your overall decision-making.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought.
It is.
And I know you wanted to talk specifically about teenagers and cannabis use.
Yeah.
Why is this age group particularly vulnerable to these effects?
So teenagers' brains are still developing,
Right.
which makes them much more susceptible to those negative effects of heavy cannabis use. Remember we talked about age being a risk factor for addiction?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this is especially true for teenagers.
Okay.
Their brains are literally still wiring themselves.
Oh.
And heavy cannabis use can disrupt that process in significant ways.
So it's not just that their brains are more sensitive to the effects,
Right.
but also that those effects can have a greater long-term impact because their brains are still forming.
That's right.
Wow.
Studies have shown
Yeah.
a clear link between heavy cannabis use in teenagers and problems with school performance.
Yeah.
Lower overall life satisfaction,
Wow.
and even an increased risk of developing some serious mental health issues later in life.
What kind of mental health issues are we talking about here?
So the research has linked heavy cannabis use in adolescents to a higher risk of developing psychosis,
Okay.
schizophrenia,
Wow.
depression, and anxiety. These are serious,
Yeah.
life-altering conditions.
Yeah.
And the evidence suggests that heavy cannabis use during those critical developmental years
Right.
can significantly increase the likelihood of developing them.
So the message for teenagers
Yeah.
and their parents seems pretty clear.
Yeah.
Avoid heavy cannabis use altogether. Now, before anyone panics,
Right.
let's put this all into perspective.
Yeah.
For adults, the picture is a bit different, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does the research say about moderate cannabis use in adults?
So the research suggests that for most adults,
Mm-hmm.
moderate cannabis use,
Okay.
and I want to emphasize, moderate here
Right.
isn't likely to cause any major problems.
Okay.
Especially compared to something like alcohol.
Okay.
But it's still crucial to be aware of those potential risks,
Right.
especially with these high-potency products that we talked about earlier.
Right. So responsible use and self-awareness are key.
Yeah.
Understanding your own limits and recognizing any negative effects,
Right.
even if they seem small.
Exactly. And if you have any concerns,
Yeah.
talk to a healthcare professional.
Right.
They can help you assess your individual risks and make more informed choices.
So it seems like a lot of this comes down to being informed, no
Definitely.
matter your age or experience with cannabis. Knowing the facts helps you make healthier choices. It feels like we're at this point now where the conversation around cannabis is finally opening up,
Yes.
but we're still grappling with all the nuances.
It really is.
Yeah.
And as legalization continues to spread, it's more important than ever to move beyond
Yeah.
those polarized narratives.
Right.
Cannabis isn't a demon drug,
Right.
but it's not harmless either.
It's about finding that middle ground, that balanced perspective based on the science, not on hype or fear-mongering.
Exactly. And remembering that the science is constantly evolving.
Right.
There's still a lot we don't know about the long-term impacts of cannabis use,
Okay.
especially on the brain.
Yeah, so this isn't a case-closed situation.
Right.
We need to stay curious,
Yes.
stay informed, and be open to new information as it emerges.
Absolutely.
And as the legal landscape continues to change,
Yeah.
those honest, nuanced conversations are going to be more important than ever.
I agree.
So what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to walk away thinking about?
I think as we navigate this new era
Yeah.
of cannabis legalization,
Yeah.
it's crucial for each of us to take responsibility for our own relationship with this plant.
Right.
Do your research.
Okay.
Be honest with yourself about your use.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to seek help if you need it.
That's right.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And when it comes to cannabis, being informed is the best way to protect yourself and make healthy choices.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Great.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those deep dives going.
Sounds good.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore. Okay, so let's bring this all together.
Right.
What are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that cannabis isn't this harmless wonder drug that some people make it out to be.
Yeah.
But it's also not the, reeker madness demon drug of the past either.
Right. Right.
The truth lies somewhere in the middle.
It always does, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the nuances, the potential benefits, and the risks.
Right.
And those risks are definitely higher with today's super potent strains.
Right. Especially for teenagers.
Right.
It's something that,
Yeah.
parents and young people themselves really need to be aware of. Their brains are still developing.
Yes.
And heavy cannabis use can have some pretty serious long-term consequences.
Absolutely. And for adults, it's about moderation, self-awareness, and being honest with yourself about your own use.
Right.
If you're noticing any negative effects, even small ones, it's worth paying attention to those and maybe making some adjustments.
It's almost like cannabis is having its coming-of-age moment in a way.
I like that.
Like it's becoming more mainstream.
Right.
But with that comes a responsibility.
Yeah. To really educate people about both the good and the bad.
Yeah, we can't just sugarcoat it.
You can't just gloss over those potential downsides.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
We need to move beyond those simplistic narratives and embrace the complexity of this plant.
Right. It's a plant after all.
It is.
Yeah.
And as we do that, we need to keep in mind that this is still an evolving area of research.
Of course.
There's so much.
Yeah.
We're still learning about cannabis and its effects.
Yeah.
Especially those long-term impacts on the brain.
So this isn't, a case closed situation.
Right. Not at all.
It's like we need to stay curious, stay informed, and be open to new information as it emerges.
Absolutely.
And, as the legal landscape continues to change, These honest, nuanced conversations are going to be more important than ever.
I agree.
So what's the one thing you would want our listeners to walk away thinking about?
I think as we navigate this new era of cannabis legalization, it's crucial for each of us to take responsibility for our own relationship with this plant.
I like that.
You know, do your research.
Yeah.
Be honest with yourself about your use. And don't be afraid to seek help if you need it.
Good advice.
Remember, knowledge is power.
It really is.
And when it comes to cannabis, being informed is the best way to protect yourself and make healthy choices.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those deep dives going.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore.